Hey guys, in today's video you will meet Callum Everhart, a former Jehovah's Witness who died for a few minutes and came back with a shocking revelation about God that contradicts everything he learned in religion. What he saw on the other side will give you goosebumps. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below which city you are watching. Now get ready, because this story will make you rethink everything. I was born in Monroeville, Alabama, a small town where the trees seem to whisper ancient secrets when the wind blows by, but where anything short of tradition was considered a threat. I grew up in a house where the Bible sat on the dining table and fear was served with the meal. My father was a deacon, and my mother led the church singing. From the age of 4, I was taught to keep my spine straight, my gaze down, and my mind still. At 5, he already knew how to recite the hardest psalms by heart. At 7, I was punished for asking why God loved some people more than others. On Sundays, we dressed in clothes too starched for children and went to Central Baptist Church, where Pastor Lemuel Briggs preached with a thunderous voice and eyes that seemed to pierce the soul. The service was long. Wooden chairs lined the back, but it was forbidden to move. Hell was a constant theme. Sin was anything that deviated from the norm. Doubt, a snake venom. Love, only if it was followed by correction. I remember a specific service when I was about 8 years old. A boy my age started to cry, scared by the pastor's screams about the doom of those who disobey. His mother picked him up but was publicly rebuked. "Don't protect your son from the Holy Spirit, sister. Let him learn that the Lord is a consuming fire." I never forgot that phrase. Those words stuck thorns in my faith. At home, religion extended to every gesture. We had times for prayer, times for fasting. Television was banned except for recorded preaching. Sometimes I would look out the window and see the neighbors playing in the yard, laughing loudly. Inside, everything was silence and fear. I grew up with the feeling that there was a world out there where God could be more than rules. But I couldn't touch him. It was like living in a prison with flowers painted on the walls. My childish heart learned to love God in fear. I thought this was faith. But today I know it was just survival disguised as devotion. That summer, the mystery of my Uncle Matthew's absence made itself felt like a painful echo in every corner of our routine. I remember an afternoon when sunlight filled the small kitchen, but the joy seemed to have been sucked away. My mother, with her eyes downcast and her voice breaking, responded to my innocent question about his whereabouts by saying, "He chose the path the world offered, son. Not everyone can stay within the right path." These words, filled with resignation and a touch of sadness, marked my youth. In the silence of that home, the sound of boredom mixed with prayers, but I couldn't forget that something was deeply wrong. Later, I discovered from the murmur of neighbors and the subdued whispers among the faithful that my uncle had been expelled from the church. One day, while playing in the backyard, I heard murmurs about how he dared to question Pastor Lemuel Briggs' interpretations, to question the justice that prevailed in that community. A neighbor, with a low voice and a conspiratorial look, commented, "They say he was looking for a truth that didn't fit here. He wasn't welcome, not for that reason, but because he challenged what had always been taught." These words echoed in me like a silent call to rethink everything that had been imposed on me. During the long nights, lying in bed with the window open to the distant noise of prayers and wind, my heart pulsed with doubts that formed like cracks in an ancient wall. I felt that my uncle's absence was not just physical but symbolic, a sign that questioning was not allowed. This injustice, exposed in such a brutal way, planted in me a seed of rebellion and a desire to seek something beyond absolute truths. Even though I barely understood what was happening, that episode woke me up to the existence of another way of looking at the world, where questions were not a reason for banishment, but for growth. This experience, although painful, was the first step towards a path that I had not even imagined taking, where the light of doubt began to break through the darkness of blind faith. As a teenager, doubts began to grow like small cracks in the wall of my faith, opening up space for questions I never imagined I would have. I remember one afternoon when, sitting by the creek behind the school, I tried to talk to my father about something that was bothering me. He, with a hard expression and eyes that did not admit deviation, said, "Son, do not question what is sacred. Doubt is the first step to perdition." His words echoed like a hammer closing the door to any discussion. However, even with the weight of the reprimand, an uneasiness began to throb inside me. In an unexpected encounter during a walk in the countryside, I bumped into an old church acquaintance who whispered that even the most devout people sometimes get lost in the maze of doubts. I heard that even some priests faced moments of uncertainty, but never allowed themselves to express it. That night, alone in the room, shadows danced on the wall as I reflected. If even the seemingly unshakable pillars of faith could waver, why should I accept everything without question? My thoughts became more and more intense, and I saw in each repeated teaching an enigma to be solved. During a service, as Pastor Lemuel Briggs extolled obedience, my mind wandered with questions. Did faith really require so much sacrifice? Couldn't divine love be expressed in a softer way? These questions were not spoken out loud, but they resonated within me, fueled by the whisper of a freedom I had not yet known. In a rare moment of courage, during a Bible study meeting at church, I dared to raise my voice. "But what if the interpretation we are taught is not the only truth?" and I asked, with my heart racing and my hands shaking. The severe looks of those present broke my silence, and the words were lost amidst a murmur of disapproval. That attempt, even if brief, lit a flame of rebellion in me. Each rebuke, each look of disdain deepened the fissure, showing that the road of doubt was lonely, but it was the only route to discovering a more authentic truth. During a gray day, in Portland, while still struggling with the remnants of my childhood teachings, everything changed when I met Elijah Crane. It was at the accounting office where I worked. The environment was dull, but there was something about it that made it feel like every piece of paper and spreadsheet carried a bit of my own repressed soul. Elijah, with his serene manner and discerning gaze, soon stood out. He came over during a coffee break and said, "You seem burdened with something you can't explain. Have you ever considered that maybe the answer lies in seeking rather than simply accepting?" His words touched me deeply, awakening a long-dormant curiosity. One rainy day, as the sound of rain gently patted the window, he invited me to lunch outside the office. Sitting in a small cafe with dim lighting and soft music in the background, we talked about everything, from spreadsheets to the dilemmas of existence. Faith does not need to be something imposed. It can be something felt, lived, he stated, with a conviction that lit up his face. He opened a compartment in his bag and, in a simple gesture, handed me a Bible with a worn cover. "Read this with your own eyes, without fear or labels," he said, almost as if he knew that this gift would be the turning point in my life. Each page of the modern translation Bible seemed to contain an entire universe, full of nuances and messages of love and freedom, contrasting sharply with the rigidity of what I had known. I began reading in secret, absorbing each verse with a mix of anxiety and relief. In moments of solitude, I remembered Elijah's words, which seemed to echo in my mind. "Let the light guide you, even when the shadows insist on enveloping you." During that period, our meetings became more frequent. We talked at length about life, about what it really meant to free yourself from fear, and about the possibility of a spirituality that embraced the being in its entirety. I felt that with him, I was finally beginning to glimpse the existence of a path where faith was not a prison, but rather an invitation to discover unconditional love. In that moment of confrontation, the truth revealed itself in all its rawness. I remember as if it were yesterday the day I decided to tell my parents about the meetings with the new community, the informal services and the spontaneous praises that were beginning to transform my view of faith. I arrived home with my heart racing, eager to explain that something inside me had changed. As I sat down at the table for dinner, I said with a trembling voice, "Mom, Dad, I've been going to a new group. It's different, it's lighter. It doesn't have strict rules like we always had." My father, with narrowed eyes and an expression of disbelief, almost whispered, "You're abandoning us, Callum. You're losing yourself." My mother, in silence, seemed to writhe between fear and sadness. "What do you mean, abandon?" I insisted, trying to remain calm but feeling the words drown under the weight of tension. My father retorted firmly, "You are no longer an Everhard if you question the doctrine we have been taught. You stray from the truth." That statement hit me like a cold blade. I felt like the ground had opened beneath my feet. The family environment, once a refuge, turned into a battlefield where every word of disapproval hurt more than any physical punishment ever imposed. Tears streamed down my face, and in an impulse of despair I replied, "But I cannot live in a prison of fear, where love is conditioned on blind obedience." The silence that followed was deafening. The shock and pain reflected in my mother's eyes said it all. At that moment I understood that the choice I made was irrevocable. The rejection didn't come in words alone, but in the cold distance that formed between us. With no other way out, I abandoned the home I had always known. The street seemed even colder and lonelier than I had imagined, but paradoxically, they also brought a newfound freedom. Every step he took away from his old life was both a lament and a liberation. I knew I was moving away from what held me back, even if it meant facing the loneliness and desolation of being cut off from my own family. On a cold October afternoon, the new community welcomed me with sincere hugs and smiles that seemed to warm the soul. I was invited to participate in a ritual that promised not only the renewal of faith, but a definitive break with the past. I arrived at a serene lake, where the icy water reflected the faint evening light, and I felt a mix of fear and hope. At the same time that the cold made my skin crawl, my heart palpitated with the conviction that at that moment, I would leave behind the chains that tied me to a childhood of dogma and fear. As I approached the shore, community members, with serene faces and welcoming gestures, guided me with gentle words that seemed to carry a promise of liberation. I was aware that every step I took was a plunge into the uncertainty of a new self, a rebirth that required courage to let go of everything I had ever known. With teary eyes but determined, I accepted baptism as a rite of passage, the symbol that from that moment on, faith would be lived lightly, without the chains of blind obedience. The water, cold and purifying, enveloped me in an almost spiritual way. I felt as if each drop washed away not just my body but the emotional scars I had carried for years. The sound of silence mixed with the soft chants sung by those present, creating an environment where the transformation was palpable. As he emerged from the water, it was as if he was reborn, the child who feared every reprimand and lived on, constant alert outside, giving way to a man who saw the world with new eyes, capable of feeling the unconditional love he had long sought. That baptism was not just a ritual, but the definitive break with the old life. It was confirmation that even if the past haunted me, the new journey would be guided by a love that did not demand perfection, but accepted imperfections and promoted freedom. I knew that from then on, each day would be an opportunity to rebuild my identity and live a faith that made me truly feel alive. On that freezing night, amidst the biting cold and incessant rain, everything seemed to conspire for my collapse. I found myself alone, wandering the silent streets of Mount Tabor Park, where nature was relentless in its raw beauty. The rain was beating down heavily, mixing with the racing sound of my heart. Each step was an effort, and the feeling of helplessness enveloped me completely. In an instant, I felt my legs giving out. The ground approached threateningly, as if the abyss itself wanted to swallow me. Suddenly, in a whirlwind of emotions, my body seemed to detach, as if I were floating above reality. I looked down and saw the silhouette of my inert body, lying on the cold asphalt. There was no fear in that moment, just an inexplicable calm, as if a blanket of peace had descended over me. In the midst of this feeling of detachment, a subtle and welcoming presence began to manifest itself. I couldn't see or hear it, but its essence filled the space around me with a serene, loving light. In this state between consciousness and delirium, soft, almost imperceptible voices whispered words that penetrated the darkness of my despair. You don't need to fear. Love is greater than any pain. I found myself facing a divine revelation, where each word seemed to dissolve the shackles of fear and guilt that had accompanied me since childhood. It was a silent dialogue but full of meaning, a presence that spoke without sound, touching my soul and restoring something I thought was lost. As I experienced this glimpse of the divine, tears of relief streamed down my face, mixing with the rain. Reality and mysticism merged, revealing that death was not an end, but a transition to an existence where love and compassion reign supreme. At that moment, I understood that true faith is not based on blind obedience, but on the ability to surrender to the unconditional love that transforms us from within. When I regained consciousness, already in the hospital, the doctors diagnosed a profound nervous breakdown. However, for me, this was not a mere medical incident. It was the threshold of a new life. I felt that for brief minutes, I died to be reborn, free from the chains that had imprisoned my spirit for so long. Now the expansion of the 10th topic follows. That morning, when I woke up from the nightmare and ecstasy mixed together, I realized that nothing would be the same again. I walked slowly, feeling the weight of each breath as if it were the last note of a symphony that was ending, but which at the same time announced the dawn of a new song. In the silence of my room, I faced my reflection in the mirror and saw not only the marks of an internal struggle, but the faint light of a hope that was beginning to germinate. I whispered to myself, "Today, I choose to live differently." Over the next few weeks, I began to find solace and strength in small conversations with Maya Arlen, a woman who, with her gentle gaze and calm voice, seemed to understand the complexity of my feelings without needing explanations. "Callum, life is made of rebirths," she said, as we walked through flower-filled parks and busy avenues in Portland, where the contrast between nature and the city reinforced the idea that even in the midst of chaos there is always a corner of peace. On one of these walks, while the light rain wet our faces, she commented, "The love you experienced that night is proof that true faith is what sets us free, not what imprisons us." Memories of moments of pain and rejection still emerged, like shadows that insist on following the sun. But over time, these scars turned into marks of overcoming, silent testimonies that I had faced the abyss and returned. In long conversations with friends in the new community, I realized that my journey was not unique. We have all in some way experienced disorder before discovering the harmony that true love can bring. Deep down, I felt that each decision to break with the past was an act of courage, a revolt against the golden prison that one day almost consumed me. And so as the days turned into months, I began rebuilding my identity, learning that freedom does not come without sacrifices, but that overcoming fears is the first step to living fully. With each new dawn, the voice that once whispered condemnation now echoed with words of forgiveness and renewal. Today I can say with conviction, true faith is that which embraces our imperfections and transforms the pains of the past into bridges to a future of hope and love. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.